Okay, I think we can get started now. Welcome everyone, whether it's morning time for you or early afternoon. My name is Randy Vanderhoof. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. We'd like to thank you for joining us for this webinar put on by the EMV Migration Forum called Best Practices in Support of EMV Instant Issuance. If you can go to the next slide, please. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the EMV Migration Forum, we've put this slide together to give you a little bit of a background on who we are and what we do. So as an industry group, we have been focused on the U.S. migration to EMV and dealing with issues that required broad cooperation and coordination across the many constituents. That effort has taken us to adding a lot of valuable resources on the EMVconnection.com website to help educate and raise awareness for all of the stakeholders about what they needed to know and do in preparation for the EMV migration. We have also been doing a number of valuable white papers, including this one on support for EMV instant issuance. We have other resources on the website that you should look for, such as the EMV 101 training course, gochipcard.com, which has some great visuals and frequently asked questions documents and downloadable visuals, and then the Knowledge Center on the site, which is the repository for pretty much all things EMV, resources that have been generated by the EMV Migration Forum, as well as links to other resources, including the brands and other standards bodies. Next slide, please. So for today's agenda, we're going to be looking at the value of instant issuance and providing you some best practices in support of instant issuance of EMV. And EMV requires some significant upgrades to the instant issuance process, particularly for those institutions that have been doing instant issuance on magnetic stripe products. This information is going to share about planning for the upgrade to issue EMV cards, some of the development that's involved, and even some suggestions on go-live strategies. So our presenters today will be giving you their experts' knowledge and experience in this area, and when we are finished with the prepared presentations, we will be able to take questions from the audience. Speaking of questions, there is a dialog box on the webinar host site, so we would encourage you to enter your questions during the course of the presentation so that I can properly sort them and prepare the speakers to be able to address them. We will have a few minutes for questions at the end of the session, and we'll provide you with contact information if you would like to contact us for further information. So with that, please go to the next slide. So this short introduction here is basically to provide you with a discussion of what the coming webinar is going to cover and what we're going to be discussing. Basically, there are two EMV instant issuance scenarios. One assumes that central issuance of EMV cards went first, followed by a transition to instant issuance. And the other scenario assumes that the issuer started out issuing EMV cards in an instant issuance environment, as they have previously done with magnetic stripe cards. But for the purpose of this presentation, we'll focus on the issuers who have an existing magstripe instant issuance solution, as well as have a central issuance environment or are close to going live with the central issuance environment of EMV cards. And while the information we have to share in many cases will not be affected by which version you happen to be on, it's best to put those caveats in place so that the main points of the discussion will follow. And next slide, please. So this is just a simple graphic to show a flow diagram of what we're going to be discussing in today's webinar on instant issuance from a customer and branch perspective. Basically, it involves a customer who visits a branch location, meets with a branch customer service representative who either takes an application or additional account information to confirm their identity, and then enters into a process utilizing a desktop printer to produce a fully functioning activated EMV card. And then that customer is able to walk out of the bank branch with the full purchasing power and security of an EMV chip card. And so now let me introduce our speakers for today's webinar. Next slide, please. So today we have two honored guests who are part of our EMV Migration Forum organization. Philip Andre, who is Vice President of Field Marketing for Obiter Technologies. Philip is provides clients an in-depth understanding of EMV and what it takes to introduce EMV in the U.S. He supports all of Obiter Technologies' EMV business development efforts and complements and further expands and defines the company's EMV offer in order to meet new requirements merging in the U.S. Philip is also the Secretary of the Board of the FIDO Alliance. And joining Philip today is Jennifer Cristaldo, who is Senior Marketing Manager, Financial Solutions North America for Entrust Data Card. Entrust Data Card is a global company offering trusted identity and secure transaction technologies with solutions ranging from the physical world of financial cards, passports, and ID cards to the digital realm of authentication, certificates, and secure communications. And prior to Entrust Data Card, she spent 10 years at U.S. Bank leading acquisition and portfolio management marketing initiatives for multiple co-brand card programs. So we'll begin today's webinar with Jennifer Cristaldo. So Jennifer?
Thanks, Randy. Thanks, everybody, for those of you that are on the line. So I'm going to start with talking about the customer's perspective of instant issuance. And the reason that customers really like instant issuance is they have the ability to get their credit or their debit card immediately after application or account opening. If the unexpected happens, they lose their card, it's damaged or stolen, they can visit their local branch and have a replacement card instantly versus waiting 7 to 10 days. In the event of a breach, a customer can go into the branch and receive a new card, so it's an excellent customer service experience. Also, you can add a user to your account. So for example, if this is a rewards card, your customer is going to earn rewards points faster because there's an additional user adding to the purchase line. Next slide. In a branch perspective, what we've seen is our instant issuance customers have shared that their debit activation rate increases by about 12 to 25%, and on their credit programs about 20 to 39%. So on top of that, you can actually see that the increased actual usage of the card when you remove the additional step of activating a card. We're seeing about 2 to 7 incremental transactions per month for the life of the card. The other branches love this also because when a customer is with a CSR, for example, they can sell other branch products while the card is printing. Maybe a customer comes in to replace a card after a breach. The CSR can walk a customer over to an ATM, show them the features of the ATM, which potentially could reduce branch employee time on maybe less valuable transactions. So it's an opportunity to use the card right away and educate customers. It also is an excellent customer service experience. You provide the customer with what they need immediately. They can add a card to their account with one stop. Instant gratification, it's bank differentiation. In October of 2015, Javelin provided a report that confirmed the benefit of customer service, of instant issuance on customer service. In a lost and stolen or breach situation, 51% of customers were extremely satisfied versus 26% when they had their cards issued centrally. So in addition to customer service, it also increases all of the portfolio metrics associated with a card program, which obviously helps your bank's bottom line. Next slide. So even though the process might be complex when you look at EMV and what you're trying to upgrade and manage, what we've done is we've provided you a white paper that will help get that project off to a good start. You'll see the paper addresses the risks and associated mitigation that you can look through in terms of upgrading your EMV solution. There's 3 project phases that we identify, which is planning, development, and go live. Also included in the white paper is a sample timeline, some documented references, and resources for the issuers. And as Randy stated in a December article, instant issuance should continue to be a part of your overall EMV migration plan due to its importance. Next slide. The white paper that we published in the fall of 2015, which you saw the link on the prior slide, this is a list of some of the individuals, the EMF members that helped in the creation of that white paper. This list is not exhaustive, and much appreciation to all of those in the EMF and the members that helped create this paper. Next slide, we're going to move on to the planning stage. So one of the questions that we typically hear is who should be involved in my EMV upgrade project? As you can see on the list, there you go. We've identified some of the key stakeholders. You can see that each person plays a specific role in that upgrade process. On the right-hand column, you can see some of the examples of where we believe that the main role is in terms of the process. So it's not as simple as, contact your instant issuance vendor and start issuing those chips. It doesn't need to be painful or complicated, but one of the best things you can do to set yourself up for success is to make sure that you have a kickoff meeting with all of the applicable stakeholders and talk about the strategy and develop your plan. Depending on the specifics of your instant issuance infrastructure, some of these stakeholders may or may not apply. You might have different roles than are listed here, so use this as sort of a reference point when you kick off your upgrade project. Next slide. Another question that we typically receive is what steps do I need to take in order with my card vendor and my instant issuance equipment vendor? As you can see in the task, you'll see a task template on the screen. This would be for an example of a kickoff phase. In most cases, you're going to be given a project manager from your instant issuance solution vendor. So you'll need to identify your key contacts from your stakeholder list and help ensure that those are part of the project. You can see on the screen, ordering EMV test cards for development and validation of the profile is a task that the customer and the vendor partner, and in this case we've noted that it's the card manufacturer, for example, would need to work together to complete this task of ordering the EMV test cards in production stock. The reason this is on a test plan is because these cards would be needed in order for your instant issuance vendor or your SaaS provider to complete validation steps in a future phase. So again, the kickoff meeting with stakeholders is a critical starting point for the project success. Next slide. How do I pick an EMV program or EMV profile? So Randy mentioned at the beginning that the assumption here is that you as the issuer, you've already selected the EMV profile for your needs. What we recommend is that you keep your profile simple by using Bureau standard EMV profiles. These are the most common and therefore the most tested profiles in the industry. Also, we suggest for consistency's sake that you keep the same EMV profile between your centrally issued cards and your instantly issued cards. This helps to ensure that there aren't unintended customer impacts to card function. The other benefit is if you were to make changes to your EMV profile, those changes are applied to both environments, both your CI and your instant issuance environment. Helps reduce the complexity of your program and therefore minimize risk. It's also important to remember that your processor needs to be able to support your chosen profile. It's very, very key. Next slide. How does my card design change? So all card designs need to be approved by your payment brand. This is a standard process. You've done this with your initial EMV setup. Even though the card may or may not change with the EMV, your finished instant issuance cards still need to be recertified for confirmation. So make sure you talk to your payment brand about that. Something that isn't addressed with centrally issued cards are the physical changes that may need to be addressed to the card art. Direct-to-card is one of the printing methods that are employed in instant issuance, and this technology works by placing ink directly onto the card using a print head. In order for the print head to place the ink on the card, the print head has to touch the card directly. What happens with chip cards is sometimes we see that the chip is placed either too high or too low and doesn't allow proper seating. So we recommend that the chip is recessed a little bit below the surface of the card. Make sure you work with your card manufacturer or supplier to understand if this requirement can be adhered to and help ensure consistency. Another option would be to have the card design visually altered to remove color near the chip. You can see the example on the ribbon card on the right-hand side. So this helps ensure that even with printer head adjustments, the card quality is not impaired. Again, remember to work with your processor and have your instant issuance hardware validated to ensure the printing on the chip cards. Next slide. Does EMV affect my secure environment? The answer is no. Your current instant issuance solution should be adhering to the payment network best practices for security and compliance, things such as bolting your printer to a table, keeping the CCTV cameras strategically positioned on the card. So cards are still treated like cash. None of that changes. By adding EMV chip card stock to the secure environment, it doesn't change any of that. So we'll talk about card expiration and card date management, but that's the only thing that would change due to EMV. All right, next slide. The million-dollar question: how long does the EMV upgrade process take? So as much as I'd love to give you a more precise time frame, it really truly depends on the project scope. So at the start of the presentation, we talked about that kickoff meeting and the diverse working group that's needed. So the sooner that you have the key stakeholders involved in having that discussion, you can determine the more accurate assessment. The average time in the industry right now, 4 to 6 months. This time frame varies. If you looking at a shorter profile, the shorter time frame if you're looking at perhaps copying a certified profile. This could be because this removes the valuable time that's needed to develop that script. If you select a new chip or you have custom profile, it's going to increase that time. So in addition, we also have to make sure that all of the players that are in the instant issuance infrastructure, they have varying project queues and timelines based on resource availability. So it's very important to have that kickoff meeting and determine where everything is going to fall in that time frame. Next slide. So how much will instant issuance upgrade cost? So this is going to vary depending on your deployment type. We see on-premise, we see cloud situations, so it's going to vary. For example, if you have a cloud setup, the HSM is typically going to be behind your SaaS issuer's expense or management, so that would be an expense that would not be covered by the issuer. Maybe depending on the type of PIN needs that you have, will vary depending on the PIN pad that you need to select. Again, your hardware may or may not need to be upgraded to make sure that you've got adherence to compliance, to PCI compliance. So the other thing to look at too, when you use perhaps an issuer processor, there's costs for transmitting data, additional costs maybe for key creation or card validation. So processors maybe conduct testing in order for this EMV card validation. So all of that can be included and added onto your project expense. And sometimes providers, you'll find, will offer additional education or in-depth training classes for EMV education, and those are some things that if your organization is looking for and needs those, are really helpful to add. Next slide. Do I have to replace my printers or my software? Maybe. The big answer is maybe. So some of your printers might already be EMV capable, and moving to EMV doesn't mean that you need a new printer. It could mean that you just need to update firmware, perhaps. The same idea with a server solution. You might need a software upgrade. In most cases, the maintenance agreements that you typically have in your instant issuance solution will cover those updates, or they're at least going to be included in your overall EMV upgrade project. That's an important question to ask. Next slide. So as stated at the beginning, the premise of this presentation is that you've already selected and are issuing your EMV product, so you've likely begun educating your members, if not already, on EMV chip cards. So if you haven't, wanted to give you an example of Go Chip Card or some of the resources that the EMF has provided. So there's free resources with recommendations on how to maximize the educational value of the materials that you're putting in the market. There's pre-drafted social media posts, there's hashtags, and also really great communication tips to ensure that you're communicating consistently on chip card use for your employees and your consumers. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Philip.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's been a very comprehensive look at what it takes to plan an EMV project. I think one of the key things that Jennifer said and is important as we move into the development phase is that you need to engage with all of the various stakeholders from early in the project and make sure they are part of your project team so that you get a successful deployment at the end at your go live moment. Next slide. When we started looking at developing this paper, one of the questions we had to ask is, who is our target audience? And we wanted to begin the conversation with those people who had already embraced the concept of instant issuance and look to those that were trying to upgrade their instant issuance environment to support EMV. We then had to look at where would they be in the life cycle of their corporate EMV upgrade. Would they be doing their branch first? Would they be doing their central issuance first? Would they want to do them at the same time? You then have to ask the question, how do you want to migrate from a magnetic stripe environment to an EMV environment? Do you want to start issuing cards at the expiry date? Do you want to do a mass reissuance? And all of these things have to be considered in your process. You've got to look at the pros from the branch's perspective, from the customer service representatives' perspectives. You've got to look at the cons in terms of incremental cost, incremental resources that will need to be there, the difference in time that it takes to get a card delivered to your customer versus the gratification that you're able to offer a customer by being able to deliver that card to them when they are in your branch location. Next slide. When we think about this, we have to also think about what's the process. So Jennifer walked you through the planning process where you're getting ready to put this together. You're beginning to think about the hardware that you have to install. You're worrying about the kinds of keys that you're going to need. You're worrying about the type of profile that you're going to want to deploy and things of that nature. You're then moving into your installation phase where you're installing hardware, the servers. You're upgrading the software in your printers, in your servers, in your HSMs or whatever other machines and equipment that you've got. And then you move into the phase 2 where you're now upgrading that machine. You're changing the software. You're developing the profiles. You're establishing carrier changes that you may do in terms of the documentation that you're going to provide to your consumer when they're in the office, in your office. And then you're finally moving into the installation phase where you've got to ask the question, do I want to do a friends and family pilot, a staff pilot? Do I want to only do 1,000 and see what kind of response rate I'm going to get from customers in the marketplace? And we move on from here to the next phase. Next slide. We've gone. So one of the key things that we think about when we talk about EMV is keys. And let's kind of back up and remind ourselves that EMV is all about using digital technologies, in particular cryptography, to provide authentication of the card at the point of sale and during the authorization of a payment transaction. And that cryptography requires the inclusion of secrets within the chip. And the inclusion of those secrets requires the creation of keys that have to be securely stored inside what we call an HSM or a host security module, and ultimately written into the chip, something we call a secure element, so that that chip can be authenticated by the terminal, can be authenticated by the issuer host, and more importantly, and one thing that a lot of people forget, that we need to also be able to lock that chip so that only you, the issuer, can write to that chip. So we talk about things like the KMC, which is the key that is used to lock the chip. We talk about things like the MDK or the IMK, which is used to create the secrets that your host will use to authenticate the transaction and the card that's present. And then we also talk in many situations about what are called the CAPK keys, which are the public keys that are used at the point of sale to authenticate that card. All of that is administration, it's compliance, it's audit, its security, it requires people to understand that you don't share keys as a single block of data. You share them as 3 components. You need to encrypt them. When you exchange them from one location to another, you don't want to send them in one envelope. You want to send them through 3 different paths so that nobody can intercept those keys between the delivery from, for example, your card manufacturer to your instant issuance provider. So there's a lot of change, a lot of thought, a lot of rules and regulations that have to be adhered to and have to be implemented to protect these strategic assets, your cards, in the hands of your consumers. Next slide. The next piece of the puzzle when we think about keys is, where are we going to store those keys? Are we going to store those keys in an HSM in the back room of a branch? Are we going to store those keys securely in a data center at your central location? Are you going to secure those keys securely in a SaaS service provider who's offering those services? And when you think about that, you need to go back and you need to read the specifications provided by Visa and MasterCard to understand what the rules and obligations are. Because to put these kind of keys in the hands of the general public is causing you and will create serious problems for you as you move forward in time. So you need to be clear on how you're going to secure those keys, who's going to be responsible for those keys, and that you adhere to industry best practices and read the documentation that's made available inside the paper that we are talking about today and provided to you by Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, Star, Shazam, etc. The other thing you've got to worry about is communication between the equipment. You are actually sending card data from a central service to your branch into the printer and through the printer into the chip. You need to make sure that that channel is secure, that nobody can put a wiretap on that channel and get the sensitive data, the PAN, the secrets, all of the secret sauce that makes a secure card work. And you need to think very carefully in conjunction with your processor, with your card manufacturer, with your instant issuance vendor as to how you're going to securely protect these strategic assets, these keys that you need to deploy, utilize, and secure while you're creating and building EMV cards. Next slide. The next piece of the puzzle is what we call chip certification. CPV, the card personalization validation, is a process that is used by the payment schemes to validate that you, the issuer, have properly coded the chip and that you will be capable of properly coding every chip from that point forward. There's this concept called major minor in the world of EMV, in the world of payments. And a major change is the change where you need to go back to the payment scheme and ask the question, am I still doing it correctly? Minor is where you need to make sure you have the rigor in your user acceptance testing, in your system integration testing, in your vendor contracts and compliance requirements to make sure that any minor change is properly tested to make sure that everything works. It's important that you understand the certification process early in your project. It's important that you schedule a certification event and make sure that all the participants are available and understand what needs to be done, and you need to make sure that you follow the rules, because bottom line, these are there to protect you, to make sure that everybody who's been working with you to create that chip card has done their job properly and has properly developed the profiles, developed the data, made that data available, installed the keys, utilized the keys, and securely implemented the secrets and other components that are essential to the good working of that chip. We then move to the next slide, and we continue to talk about this process of new chip certification and thinking about the complexity of it. Excuse me, Jennifer mentioned same profile, and that's an essential ingredient. Same chip, same profile are things that simplify the work for you. It makes it easier to get that chip certified. It makes it easier for you to explain to your customer, to your staff, what these chip cards are going to be used for, how they're going to work. And you need to be conscious of any changes that you may want to make in the future, because if you make a significant change and you cause a problem, you may end up having to start all over again. You may have wasted a chip and need to throw it away and destroy it to move forward with your processes. So let's move on to the next one. So the next phase, so you've got your chip certified, you've developed your profile, you've upgraded the hardware and the software, you've effectively developed your plan, you've effectively developed the relationships that you need with all of your customers, and they have successfully worked with you to implement your instant issuance environment. So the next step is to go into pilot, to make sure that, number one, your organization understands what is changing, what the new questions are going to be that are going to come in through the call center, through the branch operators, through the branch managers, and your personal bankers, and your credit union employees. And it's going to also validate that everything that was changed to allow instant issuance to happen was changed properly. First question is who? Are you going to do a friends and family and employee style pilot? Are you going to focus on your card management and fraud department? Who are you going to issue these pilot cards to that you're going to understand how you're going to get feedback from them to make sure that it worked the way you expected it to? How long should it take? We typically recommend somewhere from 4 to 8 weeks as a reasonable time frame to allow those cards to be used by your friends and family, to make sure they work, to make sure that your authorization system works correctly, to make sure your clearing system works correctly, to make sure your fraud management system works correctly, your reporting systems, and all of the other components that fit into your credit or debit card processing environment. And when do you want to do it? You want to do it just before or a couple months before you go live. You don't want to leave a gap between your pilot and your go live, because during that gap people will forget. So you want to schedule it as kind of a sequential event. We're going to do the pilot. We're going to spend a couple weeks understanding what happened, make sure that we're all in line, do any corrections that need to be done, refine any of the scripts in terms of the human scripts that the branch personnel will use, and then you're finally going to go live. Hopefully you're not going to be making technical changes. If you're making technical changes, you're going back into development, coming back through certification, doing a pilot again, and moving out to the network. Next slide. So you've achieved success. Your pilot worked. The chairman, the CEO, the board members have all embraced the change that you've just made, and you're ready to go live. So it's now time to push cards out to your consumers to make sure that your branch personnel are satisfied by and capable of dealing with the delivery of EMV cards to your cardholders, to your clients, to your members. And if we can move to the next slide. So you now have to think about business as usual. And part of business as usual is the fact that a chip is a computer, and a computer evolves both from a physical point of view as well as a software point of view over time. Visa and MasterCard have introduced arduous processes that they impose on the card manufacturers to make sure that the software that these chip manufacturers develop adheres to the specifications. And they require the same due diligence on the part of the silicon manufacturers, the people who develop the chips. And they built life cycles around these products, and they typically only allow a product to be in market for 3 years, or until the end of a particular cycle of a product, of a piece of technology. And understanding the end of life, the dates that are applied within the letter of approval that you will receive from your chip manufacturer are important to managing the product, managing what you're doing in the branch with the instant issuance environment. And we recommend that this be part of the planning phase to build in your long-term strategy for managing inventory. Because what you don't want is to have inventory in a branch that has come to end of life and cannot be used. What you want is to always have current inventory in the branch that has got an acceptable and reasonable life ahead of it. And you want to bring those chips that are going to come to end of life in the near future back into your central issuance environment. So you want to work with your card manufacturer, your central issuance card personalization bureau to figure out what's an effective way of managing the inventory. You also want to be very conscious that the inventory is an asset. It is like money. And as Jennifer mentioned, a camera has to be strategically placed so that it's watching the card and making sure that those cards, those blanks, do not go into somebody's pocket, or making sure that somebody is not producing cards that you don't want to see produced. So the management of inventory, the management of these processes is an ongoing issue that you need to be aware of, you need to plan for, and you need to make sure are respected and adhered to within your organization. So the next slide. So finally, the next and last piece of the puzzle is how do you make sure that that card is going to work when you hand it to the cardholder. And within the Visa MasterCard requirements, they state that you need to periodically verify that is what's happening inside that machine within that software is still happening the way you expected it to happen. So there are available in the market handhold verifiers provided by people like Barnes & Collis that allow you to validate that card. As a negative, it's an investment in money, and it may be difficult to justify such an expense for a large branch network. The other way is within the hardware, and you can work with your instant issuance provider to create and to use mechanisms of that hardware to confirm that the profile as coded worked. The con, again, is that sometimes the person that you're trying to make sure hasn't made a change is the same person that is managing that machine. Other people are using their ATMs, their point-of-sale equipment in the branch to verify that everything is working. You can develop software in the ATM that will allow you to do that kind of work. You could go to a point-of-sale vendor and you could buy the equivalent kind of software to make sure that the transaction does decline correctly, the transaction does approve correctly, that it is working to your expectation. Whatever method you select, it's important that you select it, you include it in your process, and as part of your planning, as part of your development, you include this other essential business as usual. Next slide. So at this point, we've come to the end of the presentation. Randy, I hand it back to you.
Terrific. Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Jennifer, for your great presentations today. So we now have time for taking a couple of questions. If you haven't discovered it yet, please use the dialog box on the dashboard for the GoToWebinar and post your questions. I have a first question for Jennifer, and that's, how do you know if my hardware is EMV ready?
Thanks, Randy. Yeah, that's a good question. What's most important is to probably go back to your instant issuance vendor look back at your contract, understand what hardware you did purchase. Depending on the age of the hardware, it may or may not be ready as it stands. So there may be an easy hardware firmware upgrade, or maybe just a simple update to your software to update the communication. In some cases, that won't be the case. Maybe it will not allow for chip encoding, or perhaps does not follow the PCI security guidelines, and we would recommend updating your hardware.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jennifer. Philip, what is expected for the future of temporary or short-term issuance cards, such as prepaid or gift cards, or even non-bank closed-loop merchant gift cards?
Let's start with the merchant cards. We are already beginning to see merchants deploy EMV on their private label cards. Target, back when the original breach took place, announced that they would convert both their co-branded, those that have the MasterCard brand on them, as well as the red card, that which only has the Target brand on it, to EMV. When we move to general purpose reloadable prepaid cards, people are struggling with the economics of upgrading those programs. When we expand the prepaid programs to include payroll cards, we're already seeing people beginning to deploy payroll cards. When we look at government-issued cards, so for example, the cards that are issued by with Social Security benefits on those cards are already being deployed as EMV, and we're beginning to see health savings accounts migrating to EMV. The gift cards and the incentive cards, they're going to be a long time in coming. We're going to really have to wait for the consumer to start demanding those, because the economics at this point don't necessarily justify the related investment. And then the last set of cards is the electronic benefit cards. So here I think about the WIC cards, the Women, Infants, and Children. I think about the SNAP cards, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Those will be looking to the states and the federal government to set the timing on.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Philip. Here's a question for either presenter today. Some credit unions currently like to use the same EMV keys. Is this the best practice?
It depends on which set of EMV keys we're talking about. If we're talking about what are called the CAPK keys, the public keys that are used to authenticate the card at the point of sale, the answer here is you do not want to share those keys between systems, people, or machines. You truly want to protect those keys. So in that case, I would not share those keys. The MDKs, the master derivation keys that are used for the online authorization, yes, those are really down to the processor to agree that those keys can be shared with multiple suppliers of cards, be it the central bureau issuance provider or the instant issuance system that you would be installing in your own environment. If you look at the KMCs, then Visa MasterCard is very clear. If it is a different system, a different environment, then those keys need to be different.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question that came up, Jennifer, during your presentation. I guess you were referencing the brands in your discussion about the types of cards for instant issuance. When you talk about brands, can you be more clear about what brands you're referring to?
So the payment brands such as Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover.
Okay, so the brand associated with the network that is
correct.
being used on that card.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Here's another question for either. which is an easier migration for instant issuance, either a Multos or a Java card versus a native card? And we're talking about an operating system for those on the call who may not be aware of what Multos, Java, and native cards are referring to.
Phil, do you want to take the, I think the short answer is there's not one that's easier than another. They both have pros and cons in terms of the operating system. So I think it really truly depends on what the organization is looking for. If you've already defined what type of EMV card you're looking for and ownership over card changes, I think that answer has already been made for you. And it's just a question of following the project plan and following the steps to make sure that you do everything necessary for testing and validation.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that whatever chip you use in your central issuance environment, you should use the same chip, the same application. And when I say application, there are Visa applications and MasterCard applications that adhere to certain versions of their specifications, and most importantly, the same profile. So the question of Multos, which is a proprietary operating system, versus Global Platform, which is an open operating system, versus the various native, which are, again, proprietary operating systems coming by various names, is really not an instant issuance question. It's an EMV migration question.
We had two questions related to transport keys. I'm not sure which of you covered that topic. One is, I guess, a general explanation of what you mean by transport keys, and then how can you bring cards back to a central issuance location for use if they are programmed with a transportation key for in-branch issuance or instant issuance?
Let's start with defining the transport keys. There are two sets of transport keys. The first one are called the KEKs, and these are used to transport keys between two HSMs. And sometimes they're called zone master keys. And I do not believe your question is related to those. The second set of keys are what I called the lock and unlock keys. And these are the keys that allow a system to unlock the chip, write to the chip, lock the chip, and then let that chip go into the marketplace. If you want to bring cards back to your central issuance bureau, then your central issuance bureau would need to know what that key is to be able to unlock it. More than likely, your central issuance bureau and your instant issuance provider have at a point in time exchanged those keys. So that it's more a matter of the administration and the agreement of who would have the various keys. If you've got multiple parties, there is a concept called key rotation, where one party unlocks the card, changes the key, and then locks the card again.
And Jennifer, anything else to add there?
No, I think Phil covered it.
Okay. There's a question regarding KMC, and maybe you know what that's referring to. If you are using the same processor to provide the instant issuance chip profile or application used on the chip cards produced by the processor production, can you use the same KMC keys?
Okay, I'll pick this up. We just talked about the transport keys. Another way of calling the transport keys is by calling it the KMC. They're the same. The KMC, you only want the people who are going to unlock and lock your chip to know the KMC for the cards they're going to lock and unlock. Typically, your processor should not know the KMC. It's a key that should be between the issuer and the instant issuance provider, one set, and the issuer and the central issuance provider, another set. The rules are very clear. 2 systems, 2 keys. So you can't use the same KMC if the system that does the card personalization is different.
Okay. So I see we are coming up on the end of the hour here, and so we're going to have to cut off questions from this point forward. So if we could just move to our next slide. So just as a refresher of what I said at the beginning, for those of you who are looking for, hopefully this information was very useful, and if you're looking for additional resources or like to download the white paper, please visit EMVconnection.com. There's a wealth of information there. We encourage you to use the language, the definitions, the infographics, and even any of the web recordings that we've provided for you there, and distribute those internally in your organization. Also, there's information about the EMV Migration Forum, the organizations that's bringing you today's webinar, about upcoming activities and membership, and we would encourage all of you to consider becoming part of the EMV Migration Forum and participating in this level of awareness building, as well as education about the EMV migration that's happening in the U.S. So I want to thank you all for your participation in joining us today. We hope that this webinar was very helpful for you in planning for your instant issuance of EMV cards. And for more information about EMV, please visit the EMVconnection.com or the Issuer Resources page on that website. As a final note before we sign off, all registered webinar participants will receive an email with a link to where you can download the slides and also replay the audio recording. And we encourage you to share this information with others in your organization. Thank you, Philip and Jennifer, for your excellent work today, and for all of those participants who helped develop the white paper upon which this webinar was produced. We thank you, the audience, for joining us today, and hopefully we'll have you back again for a future webinar hosted by the EMV Migration Forum. Till then, enjoy the rest of your day, your week, and hopefully your summer. Have a good afternoon. Bye now.